Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished talking about the MLB Power Rankings for this week. You had a couple big risers, big fallers. The Reds were the big risers and the Cubs were the big fallers here. The top and the bottom kind of stayed very similar. We also talked a little bit about Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Panthers and the Oilers as the Panthers take a 3-0 series lead there. And first segment, we talked about Trevor Lawrence getting a brand new 5-year, $275 million deal to stay in Jacksonville, tying him for the biggest quarterback contract in the NFL currently with Joe Burrow, $55 million a year. In this segment, we are going to talk a little bit about talk a little bit about the college football. There was some news coming out of college football today surrounding the Big 12, and obviously they've had a lot of big changes with NIL and stuff, but this is an interesting change that might be coming. The Big 12 is talking about changing their conference name with a sponsorship, and we'll talk about all of that in just a second and the impact of everything there. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question, go ahead and throw that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I see Kelsey has put a lot in there. I apologize for not getting to it. Had a lot on my brain there in the MLB segment. Had to get through that. But thank you for being here. We are going to, again, thank you everybody for tuning in and watching, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. Once again, that link is GSMC Podcast Network. But we are going to move into a little bit of college football coverage, talking about the Big 12. There was an interesting report that came out today in the Big 12 that said they might be partnering up with Allstate, which is perfectly fine, but changing their name from the Big 12 to the Allstate 12, which is an interesting kind of byproduct of everything that's going on in college football here. Obviously, the reason that they're thinking of doing this is because now you can pay for now you can pay for players. Basically, you can pay them a salary to NIL deals. You can pay them to come in and play for your program. But the Big 12 doesn't quite have enough as much money as the SEC and the Big 10, and they still want to compete. They have historically been a big football conference, but they don't have the same money anymore. Texas and Oklahoma have left. Their two big money makers, especially in the sport of football, have gone to the SEC. And now the Big 12 is kind of left scrambling. They don't have those two huge money programs in there anymore. So they're talking about switching to their name to the All-State 12, which in theory, it doesn't really matter, right? There's sponsorships for everything, right? And changing your conference name from Big 12 to All-State 12, while it might be kind of dumb, kind of stupid sounding, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. If the conference thinks that's their best way of making money and being serious, and making serious pushes to the playoffs and getting their name to their conference bigger and competing with the SEC and the Big 10, it's a change that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But it just kind of it's kind of a symptom of the bigger changes in the world of college football right now, right? It's kind of showing the divide between the fight between the NCAA, the conferences, and how they're kind of pulling apart, right? The SEC and the Big Ten have so much negotiating power, especially in football, that the NCAA kind of just bows down to them, especially when they're talking about some playoff formats. When we were talking about playoff formats a couple months ago, there were ones where the Big 12 and where the Big 10 and the SEC would get two playoff spots, regardless immediately. And that just seems a little bit unfair, right? But it was going to get approved. The NCAA is is kind of has no leverage against these two conferences. They're kind of pulling all the strings right now. They made a coalition. They came in together and they said, "Hey, this is what we want. Everybody else get in line, or I guess we can leave you behind. We're the money makers here." And it's not entirely wrong, but they also have to remember that, stuff changes. 20 years ago, Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12 were the big money makers in college football, right? It's then, Miami back in '02, or USC back around that same time, in the Pac-12 and the ACC were the big money makers in football. So stuff can change, but stuff is changing so rapidly, and these two conferences are taking their advantages and running with it, because this is the time that we're kind of reshaping the whole sport, the whole system of collegiate sports, and I'm not entirely sure how it's going to go, right? There's going to be a lot of changes in the next 10 years. It's not going to be figured out this year. There's still court cases being heard, but this story on its own doesn't really move the needle that much, right? They could be the Big 12 sponsored by Allstate. They could be the Allstate 12. I heard someone say they could have potentially been called the Big Allstate, which is even dumber than the Allstate 12. But really at this point, change is inevitable, and the big outcry over this story is people saying change is bad. And it's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't this doesn't really move the needle in any one direction. It just kind of proves it kind of takes away the last kind of it's kind of showing that the end of the way that we know college sports as, it's going to start to become more of a professional league, right? They're not going to have that amateur title, which again, I am all for players getting paid. I want players to get every single dollar that they deserve, every single penny that they earn that should be theirs. But where I start to draw the line, and where I'm kind of a little iffy on, is the colleges themselves paying these players, right? If the players want to go do a commercial, or if they want to go get sponsored by Allstate or by whatever else company wants to sponsor them, some local restaurant, they should be able to get paid for that. They should be able to make money off of jerseys. They should be able to make money off of video games, that has their image and likeness in it. But again, where I start to draw the line is directly being paid by the university, because this is a university. It's supposed to be a learning space first, right? And I love college sports. College sports are so much fun. It makes universities it brings together the community of the university, right? And it's super important to it, especially in the culture of American higher education right now. But it's starting to get to the point where it's kind of its own separate entity, the athletic department and the university. And if that's the way that they want to go, that's fine. That can be a way they want to go, but they need to distinguish that, and they need to figure out a way to keep it distinguished from the other thing, from the actual university. But if they want to keep it, hand in hand with each other, it's something that is, again, it's starting to blur the line, and we won't know how this is going to go. There's still court cases going on for at least a couple years, but this is the time where gray areas are going to reign supreme, because colleges and universities and anyone that wants to get a little bit of an edge is going to make that is going to do everything they can. It's not cheating, because there's no rule, right? The Air Bud logic. But I'm just curious where this kind of rabbit hole leads to, of a potential name change. And again, I don't think that this actually matters too much, but it's just thinking about where the NCAA, where these conferences could go from here after a move like this, is where I start to get concerned. And again, there's always that pitfall of thinking everything goes bad, and it might not lead to anything, but it's just something to think about, and it's something that I worry about for the future of collegiate sports, not just for football, because football will make money, but more for those smaller sports, volleyball, tennis, swimming, stuff like that, lacrosse, that doesn't get this national media attention, that needs a bigger organization like the NCAA to stay around and keep it organized. Otherwise, it might fall apart. But anyway, we're going to finish off our show, in talking a little bit about the UFC. Conor McGregor, one of the biggest names in the history of UFC, pulls out of UFC 303. He was supposed to be a co-main event because of injury. We'll talk a little bit about that, if he ever will fight again, and everything else surrounding the world of mixed martial arts. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.